Right now, somewhere in your body, there are bacteria that could have wiped out your entire bloodline 7 centuries ago. You'd never know it. You'd just feel a cough, maybe a swollen lymph node, and go about your day. But in the 1300s, that same symptom meant you had maybe 3 days left to live. And by the time it was over, one single pathogen had killed more people, faster, than any war in human history. This is the real story of the Black Death, and it changes what you think you know about disease, about fear, and about how close civilization actually came to ending. Let's start with the number, because the number alone should stop you. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people. At the time, the entire population of Europe was only around 80 million. In just 4 years, historians estimate Europe lost between 30 and 60% of its people. Entire towns simply stopped existing. Not slowly, not over generations. Gone, in the space of a single harvest season. The culprit was a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It lived, and still lives today, inside fleas that infest black rats. In 1347, those rats were riding merchant ships along the Silk Road trade routes, moving from Central Asia toward the Black Sea, then into the Mediterranean. In October of that year, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. Most of the sailors on board were already dead. The ones still alive were covered in black boils and burning with fever. The authorities ordered the ships back out to sea immediately. It didn't matter. The rats had already run down the mooring ropes. Here's what almost nobody understood at the time, and it's the reason the disease spread the way it did. There wasn't just one form of plague. There were 3. Bubonic plague attacked the lymphatic system, producing the swollen, blackened lymph nodes called buboes that gave the disease its name. That version killed roughly 60% of the people it infected, usually within a week. Septicemic plague entered the bloodstream directly. It killed almost everyone it touched, sometimes within 24 hours, before a single visible symptom appeared. And pneumonic plague, the worst of the 3, infected the lungs. It spread through the air, through coughing, through breathing the same room as someone dying. Pneumonic plague killed close to 100% of the people who caught it. Medieval Europe wasn't fighting one disease. It was fighting 3, all at once, all lethal, all invisible until it was too late. Nobody understood germs. Nobody understood fleas. So people built explanations out of what they could see. The most widely accepted theory across Europe was called miasma, the idea that the plague traveled through corrupted, foul-smelling air. Doctors at the time wore long leather robes and beaked masks stuffed with dried flowers and herbs, believing the beak would filter the poisoned air before it reached them. It did nothing. The fleas didn't care about the smell of lavender, but the mask became the symbol history remembers, that hollow, bird-like face standing over the dying, unable to help a single one of them. And because nobody understood the actual cause, people needed someone to blame. In city after city, that blame fell on Jewish communities. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned the wells, and in 1349, thousands of Jewish people were massacred across Europe. Entire communities burned alive in Strasbourg, in Basel, in towns whose names most people alive today have never heard. The plague didn't just kill through infection, it killed through the panic it created. And that panic found the same target it always finds: the people already treated as outsiders. Inside the walls of the cities that were hit hardest, the collapse was almost impossible to comprehend. In Florence, the writer Giovanni Boccaccio watched the death toll rise past what the city could bury. He described bodies stacked in trenches, layer after layer, like cargo packed into the hold of a ship. Priests ran out. There weren't enough of them left alive to give last rites to everyone dying. Some families locked their own sick relatives inside their houses and walked away, because staying meant dying with them. Doctors refused to visit patients. Even close family members abandoned each other. The social contract that held medieval society together, the assumption that people care for their own, simply broke, because caring for someone with plague usually meant catching it yourself. But here's what's strange, and this is the part most people never hear. Some communities didn't just survive. They fought back with a level of coordination nobody expected from the medieval world. In 1377, the city of Ragusa, on the Dalmatian coast, passed a law requiring all incoming ships and travelers to wait 30 days before entering the city, isolated on a nearby island. They later extended it to 40 days. The Italian word for 40 is quaranta. That's where we get the word quarantine. A concept we still use today, in the middle of a modern pandemic, traces directly back to a desperate 14th century port city trying to keep death off its docks. And then there's the part that historians only fully appreciated decades later. The plague didn't just kill. It rearranged the entire economic structure of Europe. Before 1347, peasants had almost no bargaining power. Landowners controlled everything because there were always more workers than there was work. After the plague, that math flipped completely. With a third of the population gone, labor became scarce, and scarce labor is valuable labor. Peasants who survived could suddenly demand higher wages, better land, better treatment, because for the first time in centuries, landowners needed them more than they needed the landowners. In England, wages for laborers roughly doubled within a generation. Some historians argue this shift in bargaining power planted the earliest seeds of the eventual collapse of feudalism itself, a system that had held for 800 years, cracked open not by revolution, but by a flea. The plague also did something else nobody expected. It reshaped how Europe thought about the human body. Before the Black Death, medieval art rarely showed suffering in graphic detail. After it, an entire genre emerged called the Danse Macabre, the dance of death, paintings and woodcuts showing skeletons leading kings, popes, peasants, and children in a single unbroken line toward the grave. Death, the message insisted, did not care about your rank. It took the noble and the beggar with equal indifference. That single artistic obsession shaped European visual culture for the next 2 centuries. So how did it finally end? The truthful answer is, it never fully did. The initial wave from 1347 to 1351 was the deadliest, but Yersinia pestis kept resurfacing in Europe in smaller outbreaks for the next 400 years. The Great Plague of London in 1665 killed roughly 100,000 people, nearly a quarter of the city, in a single year. It wasn't until improvements in sanitation, changes in rat populations, and eventually, in the 20th century, the discovery of antibiotics, that the disease stopped being an automatic death sentence. In 1894, scientist Alexander Yersin finally identified the bacterium responsible, giving the disease a name, a cause, and eventually, a cure. Today, plague still exists. It infects a small number of people every single year, mostly in parts of Africa, Asia, and even the southwestern United States. But now, treated early with modern antibiotics, it's rarely fatal. The same disease that erased a third of a continent can now be handled with a 2-week course of medication most people have never even heard of. Here's what's easy to miss in all of this. The people living through 1348 didn't know they were living through the worst catastrophe in recorded history. They didn't have a name for it yet. The term Black Death wasn't even widely used until centuries later. To them, it was simply the plague, the pestilence, the sickness that came from nowhere and took everyone. Some believed it was divine punishment. Some believed it was the end of the world itself, and in a way, for the world they knew, it was. The Europe that emerged on the other side of the plague, with its shifting economies, its new art, its early quarantine laws, its permanently changed relationship with death, was not the same civilization that existed before those 12 ships docked in Messina. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with. A bacterium, invisible to every person who died from it, rewrote the entire trajectory of a continent. Not through intention, not through any plan, just biology, moving quietly through fleas and rats and trade routes, indifferent to kings and peasants alike. Somewhere behind every convenience you take for granted today, the wages you earn, the medicine in your cabinet, the very idea that a disease can be named, understood, and stopped. There's a memory buried in the historical record of a civilization that watched a third of itself disappear and rebuilt anyway.